The first Eagle Squadron, number 71, was established in September 1940 amidst the Battle of Britain, more than a year before the attack on Pearl Harbor. By mid-1941, enough American volunteers had joined the RAF to form two additional squadrons, 121 Squadron in May and 133 Squadron in August 1941. Over the past year, these Eagles had flown countless convoy patrols, bomber escort missions, and strafing runs over enemy-occupied Europe. Now, they were preparing to leave the RAF and join the American forces. As one pilot recalled, "We knew it was only a matter of time before the Eagles would be renamed, and most of us would be wearing American uniforms." While some of the Eagles chose to remain with the RAF, the majority eagerly anticipated the transfer to the American forces. Two primary reasons fueled their enthusiasm: the promise of American-style food in the officers' mess, and, above all, American-style pay. The shift in daily meals was a significant draw. Gone would be the days of enduring dishes like bubble and squeak, cabbage and potatoes. Instead, the pilots could look forward to steaks, chicken, fresh fruits and vegetables, American coffee, and other familiar comforts from home. While the British Isles had many admirable qualities, the wartime diet was not among them. However, the most striking change was the difference in pay between the RAF and the U.S. forces. The U.S. government paid its personnel 2 to 3 times more than their RAF counterparts. A pilot officer in the RAF earned about $67 per month, £16, 14 shillings and 7 pence. In contrast, a second lieutenant in the USAAF, the equivalent rank, received $162 per month. During 121 Squadron's farewell party, one departing Eagle pilot joked with an RAF wing commander, "We can't afford not to go. Do you realize, Winko, that as of now, I'm being paid about twice as much as you, if not more, and I'm only a lieutenant. Too bad you don't qualify to come with us. Your accent alone would be worth every cent of your pay." What, old boy? In the U.S., a wing commander's equivalent rank is lieutenant colonel. Before transferring to the U.S. forces, each pilot had to travel to London for an examination conducted by a board of American officers. Among the board members were two of the 8th Air Force's highest-ranking leaders: Major Gen. Carl A. Spates, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces in Britain, and Brig. Gen. Frank O. Hunter, head of U.S. Fighter Command. After being interviewed by the board, the pilots were formally sworn into the U.S. forces. Most received ranks equivalent to their RAF positions. Flight lieutenants became captains, squadron leaders were promoted to majors, and sergeant pilots were commissioned as second lieutenants in the USAAF. Some pilots had different ideas about their new ranks. Squadron leader Carol McAlpin, for example, suggested to the board that he deserved a promotion to brigadier general. He argued that the American forces would gain a seasoned and experienced combat leader, and paying him a brigadier's salary would be a wise investment. In the end, he was persuaded to settle for the rank of major. On the other hand, squadron leader William Dunn, officially recognized as the first American ace of World War II, had a different perspective on the transfer. Dunn had been severely injured in combat in August 1941 while serving with 71 Squadron. By the fall of 1942, he had recovered and was acting squadron leader of 130 Squadron stationed in Canada. Although aware that most American pilots in the RAF were switching to U.S. uniforms, Dunn was not particularly eager to leave the British forces. However, a letter from the United States Inter-Allied Personnel Board made Dunn reconsider. The letter was far from friendly. It was implied that if I didn't agree to transfer, they'd come and get me, Dunn later recalled. While not intimidated by the letter's tone, Dunn was swayed by the generous U.S. pay and allowances. He eventually agreed to the transfer and was released from the RAF in June 1943. In truth, there was no law that could force Dunn or any other American to transfer to the U.S. forces. Anyone could choose to stay in the RAF if they wished. James C. Nelson of 133 Squadron was one such Yank who chose to remain in the RAF, spending the rest of the war with the British forces before returning to the United States when the war ended. It's impossible to determine how many Americans stayed in the RAF, as no one knows exactly how many served with the British forces in the first place. Joining the military of a belligerent nation, such as Britain, violated the U.S. Neutrality Acts of 1939 and 1940. Those caught faced a $20,000 fine, up to 10 years in prison, and the loss of U.S. citizenship. Some volunteers reached Britain using forged passports or other illegal documents, making it safer to keep their true nationality a secret. For these individuals, staying in the RAF was the safest option, as they feared imprisonment if their actions were ever discovered by U.S. or British authorities. Throughout the summer, all 3 Eagle Squadrons continued to escort bombing missions over France and conduct convoy patrols. The Luftwaffe rarely challenged these flights, with squadron logbooks often noting, "No enemy aircraft seen." Occasionally, however, the enemy did engage, leading to brief but intense combat. On August 21, 71 Squadron was on a routine escort mission when the Luftwaffe made an appearance. In the ensuing minutes, 71's pilots claimed 2 enemy aircraft destroyed and 1 probable, though they also lost one of their own Spitfires to enemy fighters. During August and September, the Eagles found themselves in a peculiar state, half in and half out of the U.S. forces. Although many pilots had already been commissioned as officers in the USAAF, they remained on detached service with RAF Fighter Command. They continued to fly Spitfires adorned with the RAF roundel insignia, and still wore their RAF blue uniforms. Some hadn't even purchased their U.S. uniforms yet. Even as members of the American Air Force, they were still very much part of the British forces. Everyone knew that their departure from the RAF was just weeks away. On September 5, Pilot Officer Dan Young of 121 Squadron spotted a Junkers Ju-88 bomber near Southend-on-Sea, which was already under attack by Spitfires from another squadron. P/O Young pursued the burning Junkers, delivering 2 bursts of cannon fire. The German bomber crashed into the River Thames estuary with a huge splash, as noted in the squadron's logbook. This would be 121 Squadron's final enemy claim. Though a few shots were later fired at Focke-Wulf F-190 fighters during routine sweeps, no further claims were made. Despite ongoing preparations to integrate the Eagle Squadrons into the U.S. forces, one issue persisted. The 3 squadrons had developed a strong and unfriendly rivalry among themselves. The Eagles openly disliked one another, and the tension was palpable. 71 squadron pilots regarded themselves as the elite of the all-American fighter units and made no effort to hide their superiority complex. Meanwhile, 121 Squadron resented being overshadowed by the senior Eagles and despised the nickname Second Eagles, as it implied a lesser status. Adding to the friction, 133 Squadron had to endure being labeled as the junior squadron by the other 2, which only fueled their discontent. The situation was far from harmonious. Rather than diminishing over time, the rivalry intensified, much to the concern of RAF Fighter Command. As one historian noted, it reached a point where various wing commanders began to worry. Though all the pilots were American, their mutual hostility was the only thing they seemed to share. The only viable solution was to keep the 3 squadrons stationed at separate airfields. However, this problem was soon to be inherited by the 8th Air Force. The plan was to base all 3 squadrons at one station and incorporate them into a single group, the U.S. 4th Fighter Group, once they joined the American forces. But if the rivalry continued unchecked, such an arrangement would be unfeasible, as the pilots might spend more time quarreling with each other than fighting the Germans. The situation took a new turn in mid-August 1942 when 133 Squadron was issued the new Spitfire Mark AX. This latest version of the Spitfire, designed to counter the F-190, was faster, had a superior rate of climb, and boasted heavier armament than the Mark V it was replacing. The Mark AX became a status symbol. Only 3 squadrons across the entire RAF had the -133 Squadron and 2 others stationed at Biggin Hill in Kent, and every fighter unit in the RAF coveted them. With this new equipment, 133 Squadron claimed superiority over both 71 and 121 Squadrons, which only deepened the resentment between the units. "We had the best planes," one of 133's pilots recalled. "We had dawn readiness -71 didn't. We would scramble in the darkness. We considered ourselves the best, without question. 133 was number 1 among the Eagles." The pilots of 71 Squadron strongly disagreed, believing themselves to be the best, while 121 Squadron had no interest in hearing that either of the other two squadrons thought they were superior. This rivalry might seem juvenile and petty, but the resentment among the three squadrons was deep and bitter. The idea of basing them at the same airfield was impossible as long as tensions remained so high. By September 1942, the issue had become a pressing concern for the 8th Air Force, with the transfer of the Eagle Squadrons to the U.S. Army Air Forces scheduled for later that month. Despite the ongoing tensions, senior officers decided to move forward with their plan. On September 23, both 121 and 133 squadrons joined 71 Squadron at its base in Dedon, Essex. This marked the first time all three Eagle Squadrons were stationed together. The officers were eager to see if their experiment would work, hoping for the best outcome. The nearby village of Saffron Walden would not be losing its boisterous Yanks, noted 71 Squadron's logbook. With all three squadrons now at RAF Dedon, the number of American pilots and crew in the area tripled, bringing with them the potential for both camaraderie and conflict. Saffron Walden, located about 3 miles from Dedon, served as the nearest spot for rest and relaxation for the pilots and their crews. Just 3 days after arriving at Dedon, 133 Squadron was dispatched to the RAF airfield at Bolt Head, near Exeter, to prepare for another bomber escort mission. From Bolt Head, the 12 pilots would provide fighter cover for the U.S. 97th Bomb Group, a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress unit, on a bombing raid targeting Morlaix in Brittany. Morlaix was home to a Focke-Wulf maintenance plant and a key rail center in the region. The pilots anticipated that the Morlaix mission would be just another routine escort job, escorting the bombers to their target and then back again. Most of the pilots didn't even bother to attend the pre-flight briefing, having performed similar missions countless times before. They knew the Brittany coast almost as well as the southern coast of England, like the backs of our hands, as one pilot put it. However, what was supposed to be a routine operation quickly unraveled. According to the plan, 133 Squadron was to rendezvous with the 97th Bomb Group over the English Channel, at a point about halfway between Bolt Head and Morlaix, alongside the Spitfires of 401 and 412 Squadrons. But the Flying Fortresses arrived at the rendezvous point about 20 minutes early, and rather than waiting for their escort, continued on toward their target. While the Flying Fortresses pressed on to Morlaix, the Spitfires circled the Bay of Biscay, awaiting orders and burning precious fuel. After several circuits of the bay, ground control in England finally ordered the fighters to pursue the bombers, catch up with them, and provide the necessary escort to Morlaix. The mission should have been aborted. Standard procedure dictated that an operation be cancelled if the rendezvous point was missed by as little as 30 seconds. But this was no ordinary mission. It was being conducted for the press and publicity units, ensuring they had a compelling story to share. Rumors quickly spread that ground control had sent the Spitfires after the Fortresses due to pressure from senior officers in the 8th Air Force. However, the mission faced another critical issue. In addition to being kept circling over the Bay of Biscay, the Spitfire pilots were provided with incorrect wind speed estimates when they were finally sent off to locate the American bombers. The pilots had been told to expect a 35-knot headwind, which would slow their forward progress. However, they were actually flying into the jet stream, a high-speed wind current that was virtually unknown in 1942. Instead of a 35-knot headwind, they encountered a 100-knot tailwind at 28,000 feet. This led to a 135-knot miscalculation. The flight to the rendezvous point should have taken 33 minutes, accounting for the expected headwind. But due to the jet stream and the significant error in calculations, the Spitfires ended up flying more than 100 miles beyond their intended destination during those 33 minutes. With an 8/10 overcast obscuring most of northern France, the pilots couldn't see anything beneath their aircraft except an unbroken layer of gray cloud. Blown far off course and unable to identify any landmarks, the pilots had no idea where they were. Ground control in England could track the Spitfires on radar but couldn't reveal their position to the pilots. There was a risk the Luftwaffe was listening in. Eventually, the Spitfires managed to catch up with the Flying Fortresses, which had abandoned their attempt to find Morlaix through the thick cloud cover and were heading back to England. The Spitfires joined up with the bombers, hoping the fortresses would guide them home. However, because they had burned so much fuel while circling over the Bay of Biscay, the Spitfire pilots began descending through the cloud layer after only about half an hour with the fortresses. Completely disoriented, they assumed they were over southern England and hoped to spot a nearby airfield where they could land and refuel. Unfortunately, they were still over Brittany. As soon as they emerged from the clouds, the Spitfires came under almost immediate attack, first from anti-aircraft fire, and then from WWIIs. The pilots faced a dire situation and had little opportunity to take evasive action due to their dwindling fuel reserves. Each pilot communicated their position and situation before doing what they could to save themselves. Some bailed out, others crash-landed, and one pilot was shot down and killed over Brittany. Remarkably, only one pilot managed to return to England, Richard N. Beatty, who crash-landed his Spitfire a few miles inland from the coast after running out of fuel. Of the 36 Spitfires, 3 full squadrons, that participated in the Morlaix operation, 22 were lost. Among the 3 squadrons, 133 Squadron suffered the most severe losses. 4 of its 12 pilots were killed, and 6 either bailed out or crash-landed in German-occupied France and were taken prisoner. All 12 Spitfires of 133 Squadron were lost. With 133 Squadron effectively wiped out, it continued to exist only on paper at the Air Ministry in London. Replacement pilots and aircraft were quickly dispatched to Dedon, but there were no more Spitfire Mark X available. As a result, 133 Squadron was re-equipped with the older Mark V. On the day the Morlaix raid took place, Pilot Officer James Goodson reported for duty at the nearly deserted fighter base. The only other pilot present was P/O Don Gentile, who had stayed behind while the rest of the squadron went to Morlaix. Gentile greeted Goodson and another new arrival with relief, saying, "I sure am glad to see you. I'm all alone here." Dr. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry in Berlin quickly broadcasted news of the disaster, claiming that 22 RAF Spitfires had been shot down by the Luftwaffe and several American pilots had been captured. The reports reached Britain, prompting questions from journalists. In response, the Air Ministry and the 8th Air Force informed the press that the losses were due to adverse weather conditions and wing icing. As a result, reports inaccurately attributed the loss of all 22 Spitfires to severe icing on the wings. Despite the disaster at Morlaix, there was a silver lining. The tragic event played a significant role in dissolving the unfriendly rivalry between the Eagle Squadrons. With 133 Squadron, the junior or 3rd Eagles, having been nearly wiped out, the bitterness and name-calling ceased. The loss instilled a sense of unity and sympathy among the remaining squadrons. Both 71 and 121 squadrons recognized that the fate of 133 could easily have been their own. The 8th Air Force took steps to further merge the 3 squadrons and end the rivalry. The former RAF squadrons were reorganized into the 4th Fighter Group, with each squadron now incorporating members from all 3 original units. 71 Squadron became the 334th Squadron, 121 Squadron the 335th, and 133 Squadron was redesignated the 336th Squadron. The unity fostered by the loss of 133 Squadron proved more effective in bridging gaps than any planned integration strategy. On September 29, 1942, the 3 Eagle Squadrons officially departed from the Royal Air Force in a ceremony marked by speeches and fanfare. The event was attended by Major Gen. Carl Spates, commander of the 8th Air Force, and Sir Sholto Douglas, chief of RAF Fighter Command. Sir Sholto Douglas expressed his regret over the departure of the Americans with gracious words he could now afford to give. Despite his earlier frustrations with the Eagle Squadrons, particularly his discontent with 71 Squadron's performance in 1941 and his threat to disband it, Douglas spoke warmly of the Eagles. He provided a brief history of their achievements, noting that they had destroyed approximately 73 enemy aircraft, equivalent to about 6 Luftwaffe squadrons. He added that the tally included a Dornier Do-17 bomber shared with a British pilot from another squadron, which he described as a symbol of Anglo-American cooperation. For the initial weeks, the pilots of the newly formed 4th Fighter Group felt like outsiders within the U.S. forces, struggling to adjust to American ranks and terminology. The transition from saying lieutenant to lieutenant was just one of the many adjustments they faced. At least the Eagles wouldn't have to adjust to new fighters upon their transfer to the 8th Air Force. They would bring their beloved Spitfires with them, much to their delight. The pilots were convinced that no American fighter could match the Spitfire, let alone the German Messerschmitt Me-109 or Focke-Wulf F-190. The 4th Fighter Group would be equipped with Spitfire Mark Vs, courtesy of the Royal Air Force. The British called this arrangement reverse Lend-Lease. The only change would be the national insignia. The white U.S. star inside a blue disc would replace the red, white, and blue RAF roundel. The preference of American pilots for the Spitfire over American fighters was a source of embarrassment back in the United States. A New York Herald Tribune article quoted an American pilot expressing relief at flying Spitfires instead of P-40s and Airacobras. This story was picked up by Time magazine, causing a national stir and red faces from coast to coast. The War Department was not pleased with the notion that a foreign aircraft was superior to American-made planes, even if it was true. The 4th Fighter Group was re-equipped with the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt in early 1943 and transitioned to the North American P-51 Mustang in February 1944. The former Eagles were the first to fly the Mustang, which is widely regarded as one of the war's best fighters. With the P-51, the 4th Fighter Group significantly boosted its tally of enemy aircraft destroyed. In March and April 1944 alone, the group destroyed 189 German aircraft in the air and another 134 on the ground, earning a Presidential Unit Citation, the highest honor for an American unit. By the war's end, the 4th Fighter Group had amassed a final record of 583.5 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and 469 on the ground, totaling 152.5. This made the 4th the top-scoring American unit in the European theater of operations. The 56th Fighter Group, led by Hubert Zemke, was the 4th's main rival for the highest number of confirmed enemy victories, with 985 planes destroyed. However, the 56th tally includes 674.5 aerial victories, surpassing the 4th in air combat. At the farewell ceremony in September 1942, Sir Sholto Douglas concluded with, "Goodbye and thank you, Eagle Squadrons of the Royal Air Force, and good hunting to you, Eagle Squadrons of the United States Air Force." In 1940, as 71 Squadron was being formed, the American volunteers who joined the RAF were in violation of the U.S. Neutrality Acts. All of them had broken the law, and some had even lost their American citizenship. Yet, just over 2 years later, and 8 months after Pearl Harbor, these infractions were conveniently overlooked. The Eagles, along with their invaluable operational experience, were officially welcomed into the U.S. Army Air Forces by one of its commanding generals. As James Goodson remarked, when the U.S. entered the war, they urgently needed experienced aircrew, so they did everything possible to facilitate our transfer, including restoring U.S. citizenship for those who had lost it. 44 years after the Eagles transferred to the American forces, a permanent memorial was dedicated to honor all who served with the All-American Squadrons. This granite obelisk, inscribed with the names of pilots from 71, 121, and 133 squadrons and topped with an American eagle, was appropriately installed in Grosvenor Square. This location has been London's most American site, hosting the U.S. Embassy since the 13 original colonies won their independence from Great Britain. After the speeches and fanfares, the Stars and Stripes was raised alongside the RAF's Blue Battle Standard, and the band played the Star-Spangled Banner. With the ceremony concluded, the pilots were dismissed. The squadron then marched from the parade ground as No. 335 USA Squadron, under the command of Major Gilhee Daly, DFC, formerly Flight Lieutenant Daly, read the final entry in 121 Squadron's logbook. The other 2 squadrons departed alongside Major Daly and his pilots, swinging their arms straight from the shoulders with their heads held high, noted the biographer of 71 Squadron. The Eagles passed smartly in review, marking their departure from the Royal Air Force. A British writer summed up the transfer ceremony with a more colorful description. It marked the end of the riotous, semi-independent career of the American Eagle Squadrons. The ceremony symbolized not only the end of the Eagles' time with the RAF, but also the beginning of their new chapter with the U.S. Army Air Forces. Despite the challenges they faced and the rivalry that had once marked their existence, the Eagles' legacy of bravery and pioneering spirit was cemented both in history and in the hearts of those who came after them. Their contribution to the war effort and their transition from the RAF to the USAF remains a testament to their resilience and dedication. The Eagle story is a remarkable chapter in the history of World War II, highlighting the seamless blending of international effort and the spirit of camaraderie that transcended national boundaries. It underscores the enduring bond between the U.S. and British forces, forged in the crucible of war and solidified by shared sacrifice and mutual respect.